Please join me in welcoming Congressman Scott Peters.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you today. Talk about a topic near and dear to my heart. So it's not hard today to find warnings these days about climate change. And thankfully, there are new activists and advocates every day. But I think that one of the most articulate and persuasive climate warriors is maybe one who's been around for a while now, Vice President Al Gore. And he wrote a piece on Sundays in the New York Times entitled, "It's Not Too Late. The climate crisis is the battle of our time, and we can win." So he first describes the familiar, sobering, and increasing effects of climate change, Category 5 hurricanes, monster fires, melting ice, tropical diseases, drinking water shortages, ocean acidification, reduced food supplies, mass migration of peoples, and extinction of species. He then encourages us. We have many of the tools we need: cheap solar and wind energy, electric vehicle technology, energy conservation advances, sustainable agriculture, and even the ability to plant trees. But finally, he warns us that we cannot get to where we need to be without major policy change. And he says that, quote, "Right now we don't have the right policies because the wrong policymakers are in charge." Now, I didn't let that hurt my feelings. And I get his point. Elections matter. There was a guy I served with on the Science Committee in my first term who lectured our witness, Secretary of Energy Ernest Moniz, saying that because there was a storm in 1910, just as big as Superstorm Sandy, we can conclude that the atmosphere must be the same as 100 years ago. Now, he was defeated in 2018, and that result is good for climate policy. There's another guy that said that because there's a snowball, there's no climate change. And he's still a United States Senator, and that's not good for climate policy. And the planet desperately needs a new president of the United States, one that does not abandon international climate leadership, one who doesn't appoint oil and gas advocates for environmental posts, one who won't revoke rules limiting methane emissions or the Clean Power Plan or fuel economy standards, one that will not eliminate the term climate change from government documents. So by all means, yes, let's win elections. But let's also not pretend that we can wait for elections to begin to take action. The wait for the next elections approach is unfortunately what we see often from many on the left, where the Green New Deal has become sort of a climate loyalty oath in our party. I welcome the enthusiasm for action, climate action, that it's generated, but let's acknowledge what it really is. A one-party, non-binding resolution that itself enacts not a single legislative change, not one, and it's already been voted down in the United States Senate. I agree with just about everything in the Green New Deal that has to do with climate. I just don't agree that the government should guarantee everyone a job, or that we should give free college to everyone, including my neighbors in La Jolla or the Trump offspring. Burdening the already daunting task of climate action with these extra requirements makes saving the planet that much harder. It's as if you want dinner, you want it now, but you won't be satisfied unless we remodel the kitchen first. And you won't get your food, and we can make a fine dinner in the kitchen we have. Greta Thunberg, the 16-year-old climate activist who captivated Capitol Hill this month, emphasized that we climate warriors need to keep our eyes on the ball. She said this: "Yes, of course, a sustainable, transformed world will include lots of new benefits. But you have to understand, this is not primarily an opportunity to create green new jobs or new businesses or green economic growth. This is above all an emergency, and not just any emergency. This is the biggest crisis humanity has ever faced. It is not realistic or responsible to pretend that a big bang utopian answer will appear as soon as the next election is over. There is a lot of work to do to figure out what policies will have the most impact and which will be most cost effective. And Democrats may not win the presidency or the Senate, and in any event, they're unlikely to have the 60 votes that they need to take significant action, and not all Democrats are the same. Betting the planet on a future legislative climate utopia is risky and it's lazy, but the thing I wanted to mention today is it ignores some wonderful openings we have before us today to work in an evolving Congress on climate change. Notably, the assertion that all Republicans are deniers is less accurate every day. At the Energy and Commerce Committee this April, EPA Administrator Wheeler testified climate change is real, driven by human activity, including the use of fossil fuels. It was much more an answer that Gina McCarthy would have given than Scott Pruitt would have given. In our committee debate over rejoining the Paris Climate Agreement, Dave McKinley, a Republican from West Virginia, made the following argument, quote, "Look, I agree that we must take a global approach in combating climate change, but even if the United States is successful in totally decarbonizing, increased emissions from China and India alone will still cause environmental havoc. Droughts, wildfires, severe weather, sea level rise, etc. Despite our best efforts, Miami will still flood." Doesn't sound like much of a climate denier, does he? That dude's from West Virginia. Speaking of Miami, earlier this week, former Republican Congressman Carlos Curbelo, a friend of mine, hosted a webinar called "Can Floridians Unite America to Lead on Climate?" Current Florida Republicans, Francis Rooney, Brian Mast, Matt Gaetz, who you heard from this morning, are all co-sponsors of legitimate climate legislation. Floridians have noticed the streets of Miami flooded on sunny days, and they know why this is. And perhaps most noteworthy for bringing about a change of opinion toward climate among Republicans is the moral advocacy of religious leaders. Pope Francis issued an encyclical declaring climate change as both the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. And the younger generation of evangelicals is increasingly rejecting today's Republican Party because its values don't match theirs on things like family separation at the border, police brutality, access to health care, and addressing climate change because they believe we're called upon to take care of God's creation. These trends represent new opportunities to listen and seek solutions on both sides of the aisle. Those of us who care about the planet should not ignore that opportunity. It's a huge boost for climate action, frankly, that Democrats now control what we can vote on in the House, but we in Congress didn't discover the climate issue last year. Personally, I've been working on climate in my professional life in public service in San Diego and DC for my entire 20 years I've been in public service, including my first 3 terms in Congress. I decided not to ignore what we've already done, so we assembled a climate playbook which lays out over 90 bills authored by Democrats and Republicans in recent years, most of which already have bipartisan support. Many have passed through their committees of jurisdiction. Some have passed the full House. It's a resource we update as bills are written into legislation and as bills advance, and it's hosted on my website, and I invite anyone to use it. It's available to you all. Last week, the New Democrat Coalition, the largest ideological caucus in the House, formally endorsed 12 climate bills. 7 are already bipartisan. We declared that we must attain net zero emissions by 2050 at the latest, and we must address the threat of climate change with the rapid urgency that the crisis demands. To do that, we continued, we must promote U.S. policies that are politically durable and long-lasting. One of these bills is the Use It Act, which I co-authored with that same Dave McKinley from West Virginia. It's bipartisan and bicameral. It supports the development and construction of vital carbon capture and removal technologies as called for by the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It also invests in technology to transform captured carbon dioxide into commercial products. Florida Republican Matt Gaetz and I introduced the Bipartisan Superpollutants Act, which aims to regulate black carbon, hydrofluorocarbons, and methane, some of the most potent greenhouse gases, which are significantly more harmful than carbon dioxide in the short run. Among other things, the bill would codify the new source methane regulations that the Trump administration is trying to kill, and would incentivize and then mandate control of methane from existing sources. New York Republican Elise Stefanik and I introduced the Renewable Electricity Tax Credit Equalization Act, which extends tax credits for investments in qualified renewable biomass, geothermal, solid waste, and hydropower, so that we can develop new renewable baseload power that could replace fossil fuels. And there are others. Now, people complain on my side of the aisle that to get Republican support, Democrats water down our proposals. Well, of course we do. If I was in Sacramento, I had a 2/3 majority of Democrats, I'd pass a low-carbon fuel standard or mandate net carbon neutrality in electricity production by 2045. That's what they did, but we're not in California. We're in Washington, D.C., and progress here inevitably will depend on bipartisanship. And I think it was Ted Kennedy who said, I'll take half a loaf today, and tomorrow I'll come back for the other half. We need to start working our legislative muscles again, not just our political muscles. Today, academics agree that carbon pricing is an essential part of component of fighting climate change. But they're split between carbon tax and cap and trade and over how much should be rebated to ratepayers. What's the right approach? Well, I'm for the one that's co-sponsored by Republicans because it might actually become law. And that's why I signed on to the one that was just referenced. We can't continue to be satisfied passing one-party messaging bills. Great challenges like sending a man to the moon or winning a world war against tyranny or fighting climate change to save the planet are not won by one political party. They are won with national unity and consensus, and we need to work together if we want our children and grandchildren to have a habitable planet. So that's the approach I'm committed to, and I hope you'll all join me. We need to take real, durable, binding action, and we need to act now. There is no time to waste. Thank you for having me today, and I'd be happy to take any questions. Sir.
As a self-professed climate warrior, where do you see advanced nuclear fitting into the solutions for getting to zero emissions, net neutral?
I think we should certainly be open to it, and we should, hope that it meets the objectives of lower public subsidies and producing less waste. I mean, one of the big problems we have now is we are trying to close up San Onofre. It's been a big hit to the renewable part of our portfolio. So I'm certainly open to it, and I support Representative Luria's bill, one of the New Dem bills I referenced, to continue research on that. That it? Bipartisanship's so obvious. Ma'am?
Thank you. Hi, Julia Piper with Green Tech Media. I guess, how do you reconcile moving quickly with being bipartisan? I think that's where people kind of say it's a bit of an oxymoron because it requires time, and I think protesters at least would say we don't have the time, so we need to ultimately show up at the polls and win all the houses and everything. So that creates a bit of a log jam there. But what would you say to that?
I think it's the opposite. So if you look at the Green New Deal, if people who endorse the Green New Deal, nobody asks them to do anything else. And people are totally happy with waiting until the results of the next election, and even talking about doing things like trying to do this through reconciliation, save the planet through reconciliation. I think that is an unrealistic do-nothing strategy. I think the real strategy is to do what we're doing, go find people like Matt Gaetz and work with him on methane today. I think that's the way to pass laws. And if we can, the sooner we can understand that whoever controls the House, the Senate, and the President, we have to do this in a bipartisan way. We should be getting to work now. That's my plan. My plan is action now. I would contend to you that a lot of folks on the left think that we should just wait. That maybe we should come up with this big mega plan that will be introduced and adopted. Even if you thought that was true, we'd have to be working now to come up with what that meant. So I don't think there's a conflict at all. In fact, I think what I'm talking about is acting now. With the fact we have a climate playbook of 90 bills that have already been introduced, gives us no excuse to wait. And that's what I think, that's what I'm advocating.
How does that get through the Senate, really?
Well, I mean, on the Use It Act, Senator Barrasso is already a big proponent of it. Our bill on methane is co-sponsored by Senator Murphy and Senator Collins, Matt Gaetz and me. I mean, these are the kinds of things that actually might pass the Senate. We passed H.R. 9. I think H.R. 9 made an important symbolic statement. It said, let's get back into Paris and let's ask Donald Trump what his plan is if he doesn't like our plans. That's important too, but that's no substitute for real action on the books. And the things that I've actually outlined, because they have Republicans, they might pass the Senate. The things that won't pass the Senate are one-party Democratic bills.
Good afternoon. Thank you for your remarks. I know that California is getting ready to investigate floating offshore wind. Can you speak a little bit about that and what that might mean to the state?
I mean, offshore wind is the kind of huge opportunity that I think we should be pursuing. You know, we've done a lot to create technologies and lower prices around wind and solar. A lot of that had to do with government support, either, you know, I think largely through incentives, but in some cases, like in California, through requirements. You know, we should be, one of the things I want to do with Elise Stefanik is to start to promote other kinds of renewables, including particularly baseload power sources. So I think it's a great development. All right. Thank you all very much for what you do. Appreciate it.